Welcome to episode 16 of Let's Rage Together, a podcast where two friends talk about the politics of total liberation and related topics.
We annihilated the world before your very ears.
You can't handle the truth.
Hey everyone, welcome to our 16th episode, Rebellion and Revolution. Today we're taking a critical look at Extinction and Animal Rebellion. We also have some listener questions, some bads and rads, and as always, lots of rage. First off, we want to give a shout out to Annalise M for becoming a Patreon supporter. Thanks so much, Annalise. We really appreciate it. And if you would like to support what we do, you can become a monthly Patreon supporter to help us keep things running, or you can make a once-off donation via PayPal. Patreon also has some pretty cool goodies that you can get at different levels. So check those out if you'd like to. And if you don't want to or can't make a financial contribution, it would really be helpful if you can also share episodes with people who might be interested, leave us a rating and review on iTunes so that more people can find us. And all of that information you'll be able to find at letsragetogether.co.za. As always, you can also email us at mail@letsragetogether.co.za if you have any comments or questions or concerns or ideas for episode topics or anything you want to let us know. But right now,
It's time for the bad and the rad.
Today we have some shared bads and rads, so should we get into it? T, what's our first bad?
yes, there are many at the moment, but we've just chosen a couple. And our first bad is basically the sheep export that is currently underway from South Africa.
To Kuwait.
Yes. So there's quite a long statement on the NSPCA Facebook page that we thought we would just take a couple of points out for anyone who doesn't know what's happening. But basically, there's a ship full of sheep that left on Friday, the 4th of October. And there were about 61,000 sheep. Well, the numbers vary between 57,000 and 61,000, so I'm not sure. But if anyone knows anything about live export, it's really, really, really horrific for the animals. They are literally standing on these ships for weeks at a time. In this case, it's a 3-week journey for them. They will be standing in their own filth, their own feces and urine, packed really closely together on the ship. It's really an agonizing, horrible ordeal for them. So some of the points from the statement, the official statement that was made by NSPCA, is that the sheep were loaded on the 4th of October, but the loading process took a few days as well. So the loading started on the 1st and 2nd of October, and NSPCA was there kind of monitoring the situation. And there wasn't really much from government or the Department of Agriculture. They were supposed to send a vet to oversee the process, which they didn't. So basically, NSPCA was there, and they were saying that the conditions and the handling of the animals were really horrific already from the outset. And Dr. Molefe, who is the Director of Veterinary Public Health from the Department of Agriculture, was there and said that there were dangerously high ammonia levels already on some of the decks during loading. So before the ship has even left, the ammonia levels are dangerously high. There was also parasitic conditions where there was feces in food and water troughs already, and that was among other serious health concerns. So these conditions will obviously just get worse. They're currently, what is it now, the second week of the journey right now?
I think it's the start of the second week.
Yeah, so these sheep have already been on the ship for going on 2 weeks now, so we can just imagine what the conditions are like by now. And the infuriating thing is that later on the kind of second or third day of loading, the 2 vets from the provincial government did an inspection and said that there was nothing wrong, which SPCA is refuting.
How do you...
They were saying everything is basically up to scratch, which is garbage.
I wonder if they're getting any money that we don't know about.
I think they just actually don't care. But basically, NSPCA tried to get them to stop loading because the animals were being manhandled, as they say. Also as a result of exhausted handlers, because they were having to load animals through the night, and they just didn't care, basically. There is also an experienced vet and feedlot expert, Dr. Sean Morris, who said that the whole shipment process essentially was a disaster, the way the animals were being handled and treated. So there was also a vet that was working with one of the Eastern Cape SPCAs and Helping National Council that was there that was keeping a lookout for sick, injured, or lame animals, which to me sounds like they were just there to euthanize animals that were not suitable to be shipped, which is terrible. And they were saying that that should have been done by the Department of Agriculture vets, and they just didn't do that. So the NSPCA is laying charges in terms of the Animal Protection Act against the South African government, including the provincial government, which is good. They're laying charges of animal cruelty, assault charges, because apparently some of their staff were assaulted in the process. They're laying charges of obstruction against the personnel that handled the animals inhumanely, and against those who assaulted and hindered the SPCA inspectors. And they're laying charges against the personnel of the company, which is El Mawashi. And they have a registered company in South Africa, and they're basically the company that's doing the shipment. So that's a good thing that they're trying to take legal action against them. I don't know if they'll win. I hope that they will. But there's quite a bit of attention around the topic among animal rights activists and welfareists as well, I guess, in South Africa, which is good to see, but also seems a little bit sporadic and disorganized and frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite good that the NSPCA has a stance against this because, like you said, it's probably like the vegans outraged against this are a very small minority. I think that the NSPCA, being a welfareist organization, gets a lot of public support, and if they back something because of how old and like respected they are as an organization, the public, I feel like, are generally more on board. So it's cool that they're bringing attention to it. But I feel like there are multiple layers here of problems. Not only animal cruelty, but like this is a direct result of capitalism. This is capitalism working. So it's, these are sheep, literally like 60,000 lives, individual lives. And we all just think of this like big number, faceless number of sheep. But it's 60,000 individual lives commodified, going to Kuwait, making someone rich.
Yeah, and they're going to be in agony for 3 weeks straight on the water, disorientated, crowded. Some of them will die on the way. Some of them will become lame on the way. They'll be standing in their own shit and basically tortured for 3 weeks, only to get to the other side to be killed.
Yeah.
And what kind of frustrates me is that I'm really glad to see there's an outcry and that there's like people who are angry about this and want to do something about it. But I think the narrative is all wrong. I've seen a lot of activists talk about how they need to educate the public about this and raise awareness, which is true. And it's, a good point. But I don't think it's going to help anything to get the public to be more outraged and to do displays in public places showing, why this is so wrong and why you should care. Like the average South African walking past some kind of awareness display about what's happening, even if they're outraged, like they're not in any way linked to what's happening in this situation. There's nothing that they will do as consumers that are going to change that. So outrage is fine, awareness is fine, but what is it actually going to do? We need to be targeting these businesses and all the businesses involved. And, like you said, capitalism is the problem. Addressing just the consumers is not going to do anything. And activists here are like talking about addressing local consumers. When these sheep are going to the Middle East, it's not going to help anything to talk to local consumers. And another really worrying argument that was made, which I understand the motivation, and I think, NSPCA's approach is to try and stop this from happening, stop live exports from happening, which is great. But the alternative is to make arguments like, it's cheaper and you can fit more quote unquote meat on a ship than you can live animals. So it makes more sense to kill the animals here and have an abattoir here and kill the animals before they leave so they don't suffer for 3 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to fit more animals' flesh on a ship, which means more animals are going to die. It's not a great argument. Yes, I totally agree with banning the export and that travel process is horrific for them. And for sheep, any kind of transport is really stressful. So yeah, that logic kind of makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to still be okay with animals dying in these numbers to be exported.
It's an extremely welfareist argument that does absolutely nothing to fight speciesism.
Exactly. So that is a huge problem. It's not enough to just say, let's ban live exports. We have to go after these companies and make it difficult for them to operate at all.
Yeah, and we need to be fighting against sheep being seen as commodities in the first place. And also, this is my argument and our argument in general for why speciesism is not going to be eradicated without capitalism being. The fact that the sheep are commodified in the first place is a problem.
Yeah. And they are not just commodified because of speciesism. They're commodified because of capitalism.
Yeah. Anything that someone can make money from will be exploited.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
So
not that sheep are things. I mean, think as things as like a concept. You know?
yeah.
But it's just really a bummer. Because also, I understand people's need to do something. But like you said, awareness raising, in my opinion, while the heart may be good behind it, it's not going to achieve anything. Because, like you said, what is the consumer going to do against this big corporate? What else would you do? You know, if you stop the ship at sea, now the sheep are stuck on the ship. If you sank the ship, the sheep die. If you manage to grab the sheep at one of their stops or at their end destination, where are you going to put 60,000 sheep?
That was my argument as well when, you know, we first spoke about this a couple of years ago when they were talking about a export of cows from the same harbour in East London. And my argument was like, yeah, we can protest at the harbour and maybe delay them, but it's delaying the situation for the animals, and you're just going to keep them in whatever transport has brought them there, uncomfortable and hot and whatever. And as soon as the protesters leave, it's going to be business as usual. And you're just delaying and extending that suffering for them. So if you're going to raise awareness, in my opinion, it should be to mobilize people to do something to attack the corporations that are causing this to happen.
I agree.
Not just to get people angry, because that anger with nowhere to go is not going to do anything.
Yeah, I agree. Awareness for the sake of itself is quite pointless. I think that there should be, and I know that you agree, Taryn, is that there should be a strategic pressure campaign against Al-Mawashi and every single company involved.
Yeah.
If we can figure out a way to get everyone on board who's concerned about this, to name and shame each company, organization, person who's involved whatsoever, who's providing the ship with fuel, who's providing the toilet paper for the ship, who's
Animal
feeding the
feed.
people, who's providing the animal feed. We can
The cleaning
name and-
companies.
yeah,
Who's cleaning all that
exactly.
shit off the ships?
I don't know if it is being cleaned.
Yeah,
I bet at
no,
the
they're
end.
not during, but afterwards they
Yeah.
would have to.
And if we can somehow get these people to financially suffer or economically, cause damage, because basically by being involved, they are endorsing this kind of cruelty. And so far, that's the best argument I've heard about what can be done. There are some other ideas people have, like you mentioned, like awareness raising things, like build a cage and let people live in there for 3 weeks. I understand the sentiment. I just don't really see how it's going to be effective. I personally think it's really depressing that there's actually nothing we can do for these sheep, these 60,000.
But apparently there is another shipment of possibly, I don't know, I think it might be cows that are leaving towards the end of the year. So, I mean, maybe there's a window of opportunity there. But I think if you're listening to this and you're one of the people who are outraged, the only other thing I think, which I agree with, is to support the NSPCA. As much as we don't support the underpinnings of SPCA and the welfarist ideas behind it, they are the only ones that can have any kind of legal recourse here. They are the only ones who can prosecute these people for what they've already done. And that is a small win, at least. It's making things difficult for them. It will cause economic damage for them as well. So if NSPCA is looking for support in terms of the court case, I think that's worthwhile. If they're looking for help with pressure in that sense and creating awareness and creating some kind of dialogue around it that can somehow help them to win the case, then I think that's worthwhile. But other than that, like you say, pressure campaigns and things like that. Basically, if you're listening to this and you am to do something, please think about what you're doing. Think about how you could be more effective, how we can all be more effective and work together, because I'm hearing a lot of people with all these sporadic, disjointed ideas about what can be done, and none of them are really going to get to the cause of it. The best thing that I've heard is to support NSPCA right now in the court case and do what they need, because they also need to give guidance in terms of what can be done without jeopardizing the case.
Yeah, and it's not enough to just tell people to go vegan. This individual lifestyle change argument is not happening fast enough and will never. So, I mean, you would have to have everyone in Kuwait and South Africa go vegan, and that's just not going to happen. So we have to be more strategic and more clever about things. And I mean, what's kind of disheartening as well is like if you had to have been at the harbor and done some kind of direct action or even open rescue or something, look how the people that were legally there got assaulted. Imagine what would have happened to you if they had caught you in their trespassing.
That's the thing as well, is like, you mentioned capitalism. There's so much money in this.
Massive money, like billions of rands.
So much money. And if you think about the kind of people who would make this happen and who would just be like, hey, load 60,000 sheep onto a ship. We don't really care about the conditions. We don't care about any of this stuff. These are violent people.
Yeah.
And that's not just a blasé generalization. This is like overt violence to be able to actually orchestrate something like this.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of what we're up against. And think about the money involved. Think about how many people had to be involved to make this happen. 60,000 sheep is a shitload of sheep.
Yeah.
The farmers that are involved. There's so many people involved that see animals as commodities and who are totally happy to inflict violence on individuals.
Yeah.
Whether those individuals are human or non-human.
Yeah.
It's depressing. And I feel heartbroken for those sheep, and knowing that right now we're having this conversation and we're trying to raise awareness about it and we're trying to have critical discussions about it. But at the same time, they're still on the ship right now, and that sucks. So
like 60,000 individual lives suffering that no one gives a shit about.
Well, I mean, some people do, but nothing can be done. Like, we can't help them. They're stuck on the ship now till they get there, and then they're going to get killed. And that's depressing, and it makes me hate the world a little bit more than I already do, and that sucks.
Well, I mean, I think the lesson with this, like with everything probably, is that while it's important to be anti-speciesism, we should also be anti-capitalist.
Yes.
And this is like the approach that has to be taken. There are too many things bumming me out at the moment, and that everyone should know about. So not to trivialize them, but I need to make quick mention of some things. And I think that if you're listening, we would appreciate it if you would just Google search and read up on these things that are happening. There was an attack by a neo-Nazi on a Jewish synagogue in the city of Halle, Halle. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it, but I would say Halle, where this guy made a gun and tried to attack the synagogue, and 2 people ended up being killed. And I think that it's a real awakening that fascism is on the rise in Europe and is violent. And it's not going to work to ignore fascism. It needs to be crushed. If you ignore it, it spreads. And that has always been the case, which we get taught throughout history. The next thing that I wanted to mention is in Ecuador, there are massive protests happening with severe police brutality and repression. And I think it's worth looking into that and seeing, firstly, the power of the people, but also realizing the violence of the state. And so that's something that I think people should educate themselves about as well. And then another thing that people should look into is Rojava. And we've mentioned what's happening in northern Syria before on the podcast. But Rojava is basically an autonomous region in northern Syria made up of Kurdish people, which are made up of many ethnicities and groups. Basically a social experiment based on the politics of Murray Bookchin and their leader who's in prison, Öcalan. And basically their politics are known as municipalism or democratic confederalism. And it's central to these politics are feminism, ecology, non-hierarchical ways of organizing society. And I've known about it for a couple of years and read about it. And recently we've been doing some awareness raising about it here in Joburg in South Africa, because we aren't sure what else to do other short of going to Rojava. But basically what's happening is that Rojava is being attacked by Turkey. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is a fascist and has been basically allowed by Trump, who's also a fascist, to go in and attack the people in Rojava.
Trump has also kind of given the go-ahead because the US troops have been removed from the border, which was basically their only safeguard.
Yeah, that's what I meant by saying he's allowed them to do it. And I heard something that seems to make sense as well of why Trump is acting kind of powerless, is that he has Trump Towers in Istanbul in Turkey, so he has economic interest to not break ties with Erdogan and Turkey. But it really sucks because the Kurdish people essentially have been betrayed by the US because they were there fighting for the US, basically, or with the US, calling in airstrikes from the US. But basically, the YPJ and the YPG, the armed wings of Rojava, defeated ISIS. They are the reason why ISIS is not a force at the moment. And if they get wiped out, ISIS will reemerge. That is how serious the situation is. As soon as Trump removed the troops from Rojava, Turkey went in and bombed them. They are bombing hospitals, women, children. It's an ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. Erdogan is a fascist trying to ethnically cleanse Turkey of Kurdish people. And I'm really struggling to keep myself contained even speaking about it. It really bothers me that more people aren't outraged about what's happening in Rojava. Granted, not many people know about it, which to me is actually unbelievable. I mean, after the US were allies with them, and people don't know who is the world's main fight against ISIS. You know what I mean?
But I think it's also important to note that it wasn't really a choice for them to become allies with the US. They didn't really have any other option. Just in case everyone's like, well, why are they, even allies with the US?
Yeah.
It's really depressing.
And now that they need the US's help, they are pulling out. So honestly, it looks really bleak. And for anyone who would like to find out more about it, we have 2 blog posts. One kind of making everyone aware of what's happening. And the latest blog post is about some of the awareness things that we did here in Joburg over this last weekend.
And those are both on the website, let'sragetogether.co.za, if you want to check them out.
Yeah, the world is feeling like a bit of a bummer at the moment.
Yeah, and it's pretty overwhelming because these are just like a handful of things that are happening right now. Obviously, like the situation in Rojava is particularly intense because, like you've mentioned before, Pete, is that right now it's like an active war zone. Like people are actively getting bombed right now and fearing for their lives constantly. It's not like a once-off attack or a once-off thing that happened. It's like right now they are literally getting wiped out.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes it like particularly heavy and intense, but it's just so overwhelming that this is still just one thing that's going on in the world that is violent and oppressive and horrific. There's so much constantly that we don't even know about, that other people don't even know about. It's just crushing, actually, to think about the magnitude of everything that's going on right now. That's just so horrible.
Yeah. And for anyone that would like to follow besides what we've written on our blog on let'sragetogether.co.za, on social media, you should follow the hashtags Rise Up for Rojava, with 4 being the number 4, and the hashtag Women Defend. Because basically the fight in Rojava is led by women. And the whole society there is actually an extremely important feminist project.
Feels very heavy and overwhelming, but we have one rad, which is kind of related. Yay! So recently there was the opening. If you follow us on social media, you would have seen this, but we went to the opening of a really cool new radical bookshop in Braamfontein in Johannesburg called The Commune. And it's a really, really rad space where it's not just a bookstore, it's a collective, and it's a space for sharing ideas, and it's just a really cool radical space in the city of Joburg. And I think they're going to do so many cool things there. So check out our social media posts about the opening. You'll see a little bit about it and you'll see some photos. And if you're in Joburg, definitely go check it out. Buy some books. There's lots of really, really, really cool titles there, and you'll struggle to not buy all of them, I'm sure.
Yeah, we have some of our friends are involved in the commune, and so it was cool to go and support. And like Taryn mentioned, they have really great books from publishers like PM Press and AK Press, and really cool titles. And the event was catered by the Fussy Vegan, as far as I know. It's like really amazing.
Yeah, the food was really good.
Free food. They also have...
They don't always have free food, but
No.
If you missed the opening, you missed out.
Yeah, otherwise they always have cake you can buy.
Really delicious cake and coffee.
By the veganist, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And really delicious coffee where they have macadamia and almond and soy milk you can get and whatever. And it's just a super cool space, and it's very inclusive, like a safe space, and yeah, it's great to support. So we thought it would be a really good place to meet up with other like-minded people on this past weekend and meet up and discuss what we could possibly do about Rojava and how we could show support. So yeah, on the 12th of October, it was the Global Action Day against the Turkish occupation and ethnic cleansing of Kurds in north and east Syria. So about 12 of us met up at the commune, basically to think and talk and collaborate on how we could possibly show solidarity with our comrades in Rojava, currently under attack by fascist Turkey. So basically, we just shared coffee and cake and conversation. We spoke and read about the current situation, discussed how we could show solidarity, realized that it's kind of frustrating because outside of showing solidarity, really the only thing that we can do is go to Rojava and join the fight. But basically, we wrote, printed, folded pamphlets and distributed them. We made pin badges.
Which, by the way, is really fun. So it's another little rad in life right now.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, it was fun while constantly being aware of how heavy the situation was as well.
Yeah.
But if anyone would like to pick up a pamphlet or bunch of pamphlets, they're available for free at the commune. And there are also pin badges that you can buy, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Or I'm sure you can get one with the pamphlets, but I'm not sure how it's working.
Or go and buy a book and then you can get some free pins.
Yeah. And we also made a big banner saying South Africa shows solidarity with Rojava. And then I'm going to try say it, but it'll probably be wrong. Is Savasa Veskala Hayır,
I think that's pretty good.
which is Turkish for no war or occupation. It was really cool to have a comrade there from Turkey who could put the Turkish in for us. And then we basically just took a photo in solidarity, took the banner along to a street party that was happening in Melville here in Johannesburg, walked through the party and handed out pamphlets and spoke to people. And that was basically it. And we just hope that the stuff we did can provide even a little morale for the people on the ground in Rojava.
Yeah, it can feel kind of almost pointless to be like, what are we doing making a banner when things are so heavy? But I think if there are like displays of solidarity from all over the world, at least that shows that there are people who care. And hopefully people will see that and realize that, you know, it's not everyone that's just going on with their lives as normal and not really caring. So
yeah,
it's a small gesture, I guess, but it's at least something to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm not normally someone who promotes something just for awareness. But in this situation, I think it's really shocking how few people know about Rojava. So I do think it was an important thing for us to do.
And also on our website, on the blog post, as Pete mentioned, we were folding and distributing pamphlets. So if you are interested in reading that, there's a PDF version in the blog post that you can download. You can print it yourself. You can leave it at work. You can give it to friends and family who might not know what's going on there and raise awareness in that way. Yeah, just download that and print it if you have the resources to do that. Otherwise, as Pete said, you can always pay a visit to the commune and pick some up from there.
Yeah, so this continuation of actions is really important. And I wanted to just read a quick quote that I got off the Crime Think website. They're posting a lot of posts about Rojava and what's happening there, and as well as on their social media. But it says, we call on all people of good conscience to engage in protest and disruption at Turkish consulates, US government offices, arms manufacturers, and businesses connected with the Turkish government, such as Turkish Airlines. The Rojava Solidarity Committee Europe has joined organizers in Rojava in calling for a day of action on October 12th against the Turkish invasion. We endorse this call and call for further actions before and after October 12th. We need to build a context for broad-based direct action as a step towards building a global movement that can make such atrocities impossible. Together we can stop the invasion. See you in the streets. So that's just a call for action that I think is important to put out there because, yeah, the 12th was the official day, but I feel like this should be a continuation. So I think that some of us are planning more things, and you'll probably see it through our social media as we do. So anyone in Johannesburg, you're welcome to join, and anyone else who's listening, please talk to people about this situation, and please, if you can, do something.
Yeah, and as you said, ongoing awareness I think is important because this is not going to end overnight and it's not going to end well. So,
well, the hope is that it will.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much hope left for anything lately, But
Yeah.
yeah, I hope it ends well. I hope it ends better than expected. But
I think it's just important both to show solidarity, but to make sure that Rojava is never forgotten what's happened there. So I think we will also do an episode on the autonomous region of Rojava and democratic confederalism.
then from that heavy note, even though that was our rad, it was still heavy. We also have a maybe. So Pete, you saw something on social media, and I think we have spoken about save vigils and similar actions before. I'm not sure to what extent, I can't remember. A whole 15 episodes is a lot of speaking. But we decided today to discuss a little bit more about the save movement and vigils and what we think about that. So, Pete, do you want to just quickly mention what you saw online about the save movement so we can just delve into that again briefly?
Yeah, sure. So Animal Rights Zone, AR Zone on Facebook, they have a great podcast, by the way.
Not very well recorded, but the content is solid.
Yeah, the content's solid, especially the interview with Carol Adams. I thought was really good. But they posted this photo. Well, they reposted this photo by this person, Denise V. Friend, which said, "Pictures galore. What exactly does this achieve? Imagine that instead of animals, there were humans inside those trucks. Would you feel comfortable doing this?" The photograph is of 2 trucks. There's a cop on the far left side, and then against the trucks, basically everybody else who's there. It looks like about 30 people or so, all sticking their arms into the trucks, taking photos.
And filming.
And filming.
Yeah.
So Animal Rights Zone said, "It's so sad to see the speciesism and the opportunistic exploitation here. Stop and think about this for a moment." So we did that. What is your opinion on what they're saying?
Well, we've both attended and been part of vigils, and we've also both had critical discussions about this. As I said, I can't remember to what extent we've discussed it on the podcast itself. But in my opinion, I completely understand where they're coming from in saying that this is speciesist. It's kind of an exploitation of the animals that are going into the abattoir to be killed, and everyone just kind of bombarding them with phones to get footage and all of that. And I can understand the criticism. I can understand how you see some activists even filming themselves crying, looking at these trucks. I hate that so much.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Honestly, it's not about you. If you go to a vigil and you film yourself crying,
you shouldn't be there.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that some people film themselves talking about what's happening to kind of narrate what's going on, to explain the process and to explain what happens. That I can kind of understand. But you see far too many activists just crying and, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we tried," all this like dramatic. I mean, it is heavy, but you don't need to be dramatic and put the attention on yourself, basically. That is absolute exploitation and speciesism. For me, though, I think vigils have an important place because, for example, we went to one here where we were outside a so-called beef slaughterhouse, and the condition of the animals going in there, not that we are about welfare reform and conditions and all of that, the use itself is the problem, but the footage and the photos that we got of, for example, a cow that was lying down on the truck, which should not be happening, and suffering and literally dying in filth,
Getting trampled on
yeah. Against all kind of animal welfare protection acts, anything, rules and laws and regulations, that enabled some of the activists to then contact the local SPCA to do an investigation there and all of that kind of stuff, which again is not the best end goal to have, but it raises awareness. It shows people what's happening. It avoids the defense that, "Oh, that's not how it is here." It shows people the reality. And I think some of the photos and footage that come out of it are really powerful and really can raise a lot of awareness and can make people understand the magnitude of what's happening to these animals. It's not just a happy little farm truck going in with happy animals, not knowing what's coming. It's not that. But I understand when there are 30 people standing alongside a truck, that's not necessary.
Yeah, I think it can also be potentially stressful for the pigs.
That's
or
what
the
I was going to
animals
say.
on board, right? Like
Yeah.
to have all of these humans there taking photos. Why don't you just have 2 or 3 really good photographers taking opportune photos to gather content? I mean, personally, I find save vigils difficult to attend in the first place. And I actually don't think that, we both actually think that you shouldn't attend too many. because or do them too frequently, because they are actually like really traumatizing. And I think that it's a really fast way to burn yourself out. Not just the fact that you're seeing evidence of cannibalism and disease and how animals are transported and dehydrated and everything, but the fact that you know that the animals arrive and you cannot do anything. Like you're going to take a photo and then the truck is going to go into the slaughterhouse.
You know that the individuals you just made eye contact with are about to die.
Yeah, and you aren't doing anything. And I think, no disrespect to anybody, but I don't think the animals care about the love and whatever you're sending them, love and kind thoughts you're sending them before they die.
Water, whatever.
It does. That to me is a really pointless thing to point out as an argument in pro of it. I think what you're saying is important in terms of gathering content, showing people stuff and maybe building cases. It's fine, but what is the point really of going to watch them die if you aren't going to actually stop the trucks and liberate the animals? Like, it feels like a thoughts and prayers experiment. You know?
Yeah, on that note, I think, the people who are like, oh, we'll just show them the last bit of love, I don't think that's a valid point, because most of those animals wouldn't have had much interaction with humans, and the interaction they have had might have been negative. So I think the risk of terrifying them is very high.
Actually more than likely negative. I don't think it's at all.
That's what I'm saying, is there's a high risk that you're actually going to scare them by trying to touch them or any of that rather than comfort them. So I don't think it's even worth trying. Maybe you comfort one. Maybe there's an animal that approaches you while you're there and you touch their snout or whatever it may be. And maybe it does offer some comfort. But if you're going to approach an animal, I think that's a problem, because you are risking scaring them. And then to the point that AR Zone was making, that it's exploitation, and what the person was saying, imagine there were humans inside these trucks. I fully understand that. And I understand that there is this underlying sense that we are just capturing exploitation and using it and using the suffering of these animals and putting it online. And that can be in itself exploitative. But I also disagree, because, we've just been speaking about Rojava, and I mean, I've avoided a lot more of the content than you have, Pete, because I just feel, as much as we have a responsibility to get informed and understand, I'm also currently operating like maximum emotional capacity, and I just cannot handle seeing that. But what I have seen, and what you've told me you've seen, there are people in very desperate situations who would go as far as filming themselves and their own situations to raise awareness. There are people there capturing what's happening, and it's horrific. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody going through that wants to be filmed in their suffering. But in those moments, it is worth it to raise awareness, to say, this is what's happening, wake up. So to use the analogy of, imagine there were humans inside those trucks, actually, yes, I understand that it can be seen as exploitative, but actually, if there were humans on those trucks, I guarantee they would actually want you to film and capture and try and make people aware of what's happening. So while I think it's a sensitive subject, and I think you should be very respectful in using that footage, especially because those animals can't consent to that footage, because they can't consent and because they can't take the footage themselves, we almost have a responsibility to gather that footage in a respectful way and use it the same way that humans would actually want their stories to be told. So I think it's a balance, really.
The only thing that bothers me about it is why, like we mentioned, why are there like 30 people? Yeah. Like what is important about trying to get as many people as possible to come to a safe vigil? Is it not better to get, like I said, 2 or 3 good photographers and maybe some other people who can stop the trucks and get some footage and leave, and footage and leave, because otherwise I don't see what it is other than giving yourself like a self-congratulatory pat on the back for going to some kind of protests like against this happening when it is going to happen anyway.
But I think the point you're making about a lot of people showing up, I guess you can't really turn people away. If you organize an event and they show up, they want to do something, and I think that's cool. And maybe they just want to document so that they can raise as much awareness as possible. These trucks are also really big, so I guess it's good that you're getting footage from all angles, whatever. But I think, even if there are a lot of people they could split up the group and say, for this truck, just half of you go forward so you don't scare the animals, and just be mindful of those things while also getting as much footage as possible. But like you said earlier, don't do the vigils every week. You don't need to do that,
I mean, I just don't see the point of it being a invite everyone event. I think that it's the way it should be is like, we need 10 people who would like to volunteer. Please can we have these photographers or something, or even if they're not photographers, and I mean, photos are pretty good, but I mean, you're going to get footage and photos of 10, 20 trucks coming into a slaughterhouse. I just feel like because people are so desperate to do things, they are often not thinking about the point of doing it. And so you get burnt out, but you also feel like you did something, even though you didn't really.
But in that sense, maybe it's better that there are actually a lot of volunteers, but I think it would be up to the coordinators to organize it better. So you have a presence there to put pressure on the slaughterhouse, for example, and say, look how many people oppose what you're doing. Not that that's ever going to make a difference. They really don't care.
I mean, that's a good point I didn't think about.
But to have a big group there, I think can be impactful to show like that there's a resistance to it. But then the organizers should also, not just for the sake of not traumatizing the animals, but also the volunteers, to say, you know what, there's this many trucks coming at this rate. How about 20 of you go forward and get footage for this? Because then you're not re-exposing yourself as well as a volunteer with every truck that comes in. So separate it so the humans are not getting traumatized and the animals are not getting traumatized, but you can still have a big group of volunteers there to put pressure and to show. I mean, I think it's what bothers me sometimes as well is it seems like some of the people like to be traumatized in a way. Like they enjoy getting into the state where they are like inconsolable and bawling, and it's like self-flagellation. Yeah, and that's I think is a problematic thing. Like I, for example, won't go to a vigil if I'm not doing well in my personal life. Like if I'm stressed or overwhelmed. I haven't been to one in ages. I've only been to a handful of them. But I'm not going to go if I'm not in a good space. And I think far too many people are just like, oh, well, this is more important than me. You know what? Other people can take a photo on their phone. Yeah, you don't have to be at every one.
The animals don't, in my opinion, need you to be there.
And if you're not coping, like, what is the point? You're just going to traumatize yourself, get burnt out, and then you're going to be an ineffective activist anyway. It's pointless. But
if there's a direct action or liberation happening, that's a different story. But
But going to take photos when there are 20 other people there anyway to take photos, if you're not okay, just don't go.
Yeah.
So that's a maybe for us. We think that there's some merit in doing vigils. We think there's a lot of problems with them. As always, critical thinking is key, and that's that. So moving on to some listener feedback. We had another email from Annalise, who is also our latest Patreon supporter. So Annalise sent us quite a long email again. We really admire the time that you put into these emails, Annalise. We appreciate it a lot. So we're just going to go through a couple of points that were raised there and discuss them. So the first point that Annalise raised in her email was that she notices that people post graphic images of slaughter or something violent happening to non-human animals in passing. So this kind of ties in with vigils as well on their social media. And then the next moment are doing something fun, like playing volleyball. So she says she finds it very confusing and problematic and thinks that we should be reacting to these images in ways that fits what's going on with them. Then she's asking, what are our thoughts on desensitization to violence against other species? So basically what Annalise is asking is how we feel about being desensitized to constant imagery of animal exploitation and violence, and also not kind of responding to those images with the intensity that they deserve, essentially. What do you think, Pete?
I think volleyball is quite fun. Haven't played it in a really long time though. But no, to answer seriously, I think that it's a difficult question because personally I don't really like posting graphic footage and images of animals going to slaughter or something. I think every now and then it's like a good reminder, and if it's pertinent to some kind of situation, then yeah, sure. And I think that it's off-putting to a lot of people. But at the same time, if what Annalise is saying is like, why do you post a heavy image and then the next image is like you playing volleyball? I guess it depends on the time frame you're doing it, but I mean, you're also a human being who has to live their lives, and we should also try to enjoy our lives because they aren't very long. If you love playing volleyball and you also care about animals, I think it's not a bad thing for your feed to have photos of what happens to animals and photos of volleyball. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. But I think she's raising an important point in that it can almost trivialize what's going on if you tend to post graphic stuff all the time. And then in between, just, life as is, happy, like, oh, look at this cool thing. Oh, look at this slaughter. Oh, look at this cool thing. It can kind of minimize what's happening. So similar to you, I also am not a fan of constant sharing. And I think that people who do that constantly do burn themselves out, burn out anyone who's following them in terms of or desensitize them maybe as well. So I think for me, if you're going to share something, it should be kind of, as you mentioned, contextual. It should be, this has happened, this is why I'm posting this, this is why you should pay attention. Because I think also when activists have a tendency to overshare, look what's happening, look what's happening, look what's happening, people get annoyed because they feel like, I don't want to see this constantly, so I'm just going to unfriend or unfollow you or whatever.
Yeah.
So you're losing their attention anyway. I think it's much more effective to do it now and then when you have something really important to say without just bombarding those images. It's also more respectful to the animals to really consider what you're saying and what you're posting than just bombarding people with imagery. But then on the note of desensitization, it's also an important point to raise for activists to be aware of, that if you yourself are posting things really often, eventually you might get to the point where it doesn't really affect you. And I think that Annalise has made a really important point, that our reaction should fit the severity of what's going on. And if we lose that reaction and we lose that empathy, how can we expect other people to have it? If we have traumatized ourselves to the point of desensitization, we can't expect others to take it seriously. So I'm wary of the use of graphic imagery. I think it has an important place, and I think it does make people aware sometimes. It doesn't work for everyone. It puts some people off, but I think the overuse of it is a problem. Desensitization is a real risk. And I think it is a valid point that you could trivialize those things as well. If you sharing that and then, carrying on with life as if nothing is wrong in the world.
Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like it also trivializes it to do it all the time. In a way, it could be in a kind of speciesist, that you are exploiting like the situation of these animals to make your point.
Yeah.
Even if the point is for them. I don't see how it's more beneficial to be posting 10 videos of cows getting their throats slit than one with a bunch of really solid anti-speciesist logical arguments or illustrations that are non-graphic that make people think, for example. So, yeah, I mean, that's the, not counterpoint, but an add-on idea.
Yeah, I think you make a good point that we have to also be mindful of how the message is coming across to other people and whether the violent imagery is actually going to convey the message that we want them to receive.
Yeah.
But also on the note of, not oversharing these kind of images and then sharing general life, I think there's also a perception of animal rights activists as these angry, oversensitive people who are just sharing violent stuff all the time, and people don't want to see that. So they're like, you're all a bunch of militant, extreme, whatever labels get thrown at us, We're just regular people who happen to care about justice and also like things like volleyball.
Yeah.
We're
agreed.
normal people. You can relate to us. You can talk to us. We do have senses of humor. We can have fun, but also shit is heavy. So we're going to talk about that sometimes.
Yeah. Her next point is, I've been thinking a lot about social movements and realized that they usually have a word for the oppression and a word for the political ideology that people use to end the oppression, e.g. sexism, feminism. Veganism is not portrayed as a true counter to speciesism from what I've seen. As far as I know, racism also does not have a word for this, and I think maybe that's a problem. The closest word I can come to as the foil to racism is Afroism. For example, people that are against sexism or one could say anti-sexist are feminists. This seems really clear to me who is on the right side and who is on the wrong. What do you think of that point, T?
I think it's an interesting point to think of, but to me, veganism should be portrayed as the counter to speciesism. Unfortunately, it's often not. We have a lot of lifestyle vegans who are all about that diet life and seeing it as food only, and that is a problem.
Yeah.
Vegan should be seen as a term that encompasses anti-speciesism, anti-oppression. It should be seen as a political term. It is not the same as a plant-based diet. And it kind of sucks that veganism has often been portrayed as not the counter to speciesism. And so many vegans don't seem to even understand speciesism properly in their activism. So I agree that it's not always framed in that way, but it should be. Vegan is to speciesism what feminist is to sexism.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, for example, there was that thing shared recently about some company that did this silly thing of a burger where they said it's 50% beef, 50% vegan.
How ridiculous.
It isn't 50% vegan, it's 50% vegetable.
Yeah.
There are no ethics involved with that. Something is not vegan if it has no ethics attached. It's just plant-based or vegetable or fruit. You know, it's like, how can you say that something is vegan?
Yeah, I understand labeling a product as vegan as a kind of shortcut to say suitable for vegans.
Yeah.
But the product itself has no political ideology or, it's just a vegan-friendly product.
Yeah. Just like you get people who eat plant-based diets who aren't vegan.
Yeah.
They could still be wearing leather, using things that are tested on animals. I don't know. I mean, I think it's important to include human oppression and liberation in veganism too.
Yeah, and that itself is complex because then can you say that exploitative chocolate could be labeled vegan? Not really.
Yeah.
So it's complex, but I think to me, I don't care enough about like product labeling to get like pedantic over that. But to me, if it's labeled vegan, it just means plant-based essentially, suitable for vegans. Doesn't necessarily mean it's ethical. There's a whole other realm of things you need to look into there.
Yeah.
But it should be political. If you say... when you're talking about veganism, it should be very clearly the opposite to speciesism. There isn't really a word for, a similar word when you're talking about racism, except anti-racist. But that's pretty clear anyway.
I mean, I don't know if Afroism is like the best term or the most appropriate term. I mean, the book Afroism, written by Af and Still Co., is very much about the censoring of black vegans in the vegan movement, more than a fight against racism. But I do appreciate the sentiment behind that, and I agree with you.
For those listening, if you hear tapping sounds, that's Josie, sweet, sweet Josie, walking on the wooden floors with her long talon nails. And she's a very cute doggo, and we love her, so...
Unfortunately, unfortunately, she has a lot of energy and it's really hard to keep her still and quiet.
And we have been struggling to find time to record this episode, as we have been a lot lately. So apologies for the noise, but Josie's very cute, so just deal. The next point that Annalise raised in her email, she says revolution. So many leftists and anarchists want a revolution, and so do I. What I don't understand is if we want it so bad, what are we waiting for? Maybe I'm naive, but I think we already have the numbers in some places. We just have to act. So many leftists, from what I see, also do nothing because it's a capitalist system and they are waiting for the revolution, and I don't understand why. What are your thoughts, Pete?
It is really difficult to figure out what to do under a capitalist system. So I think that while it may be true, I think it's a kind of an unfair statement to say that a lot of leftists do nothing, especially radical leftists, because I actually wouldn't just say that I'm a leftist. Like as an anarchist, we are like left of the left, you know what I mean? Mm. And then as far as Annalise is saying that what are we waiting for, I think that no one is waiting. And every time there's been an opportunity throughout history to create revolution, it has happened. So it's really worth looking into, like we mentioned earlier, Rojava and the community that's been set up there in Kurdistan and northern Syria. It's really worth looking into the Zapatista community in Mexico. It's worth looking into the Spanish Civil War and during that period, but there are also examples of anarchism and radical leftism, I guess, happening everywhere around the world all the time. So, for example, we also mentioned the Commune. That's a small space of radical left politics in action, creating spaces where it can be practiced. So I don't think it's a super fair question. I think it's really like with veganism, and it very much frustrates me when vegans don't know the history of the animal or know anything about the history of the animal rights movement. It's really worth looking into and is inspiring to look into. And there is a lot of literature about the history of anarchism and resistance and revolution worth looking into. Also, check out what's happening at the moment in Hong Kong, Ecuador. There are many examples of it taking place.
I also think that I agree with what you're saying, Pete, but I also think that I kind of disagree with the point that Annelies makes that we already have the numbers in some places. I don't think that's true. I think any number is enough to do something and to start a revolution. But, you know, when you say, what are we waiting for? I don't understand. Capitalism is so oppressive, and there are a handful of really, really wealthy, really powerful people that will just crush anything that stands in the way of that. So it's not as simple as we have 5 people or we have 5,000 people, let's start a revolution. Yeah, you might cause some disruption, you might cause some economic damage, you might achieve small goals along the way, and that's cool. And I think if that's what you're referring to, then yeah, we should probably be doing more of that. But the thing is, people are scared because, you know, when you talk about taking action on a lot of these issues, there are real risks involved. That the system that we operate under creates these difficulties that stand in our way. You have to really be willing to put a lot of risk in if you want a real revolution of any kind, whether you're talking about human or non-human rights. You've got to realize that if you are protesting and rioting, you might end up in prison, which in South Africa is really not going to be a fun time for you. Your whole livelihood can be affected. For a lot of people, their lives could be lost, especially if you're a person of color, the risks are even higher. The people that have the most power can literally do whatever they want because they can pay whoever they want. I don't think we can even comprehend the amount of power that a few individuals in the world have, that they will not let anyone stand in their way, and they have enough resources to make sure of that. So it's not as simple as getting the numbers, starting a revolution, because you will get crushed. And that's not to sound defeatist, and it's not to sound like, oh, well, we're helpless, you know, let's just do nothing. We should be doing things. But I don't think it's as easy as that. And when you say we have the numbers, we have the numbers of people who are keen for a revolution. We have the numbers of people who, in theory, oppose capitalism or oppose certain kinds of oppression. But in reality, how many people are willing to put their life on the line? How many people are willing to sacrifice their homes, their livelihood, their families, their freedom for any specific cause? How many people are willing to risk serious jail time? Not very many. I myself am very scared of a lot of those risks. I don't know if I could say I'd be willing to go to jail for a lot of the things that I like really passionately believe in, but you also have to look at, you know, people who have dependents, either human or non-human dependents. It's not a small thing to say, oh, well, if I go to jail for 15 years, it's fine. You know, what about the children or animals that you look after?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there's so many risks. If you're a person of color, maybe you can go riot, but what if a cop kills you? You know, that's a huge risk. So yes, maybe there are numbers. Yes, maybe people could be doing more, but also you have to look at the reality of the situation and how oppressive the system actually is. And I don't have any answers, but it's really a massive, massive thing that we're up against.
Yeah, and any leftist, not even radical leftist and anarchist, any kind of revolutionary, is going to feel that constant frustration because capitalism and neoliberalism convinces us that we can use the tools they give us to change the system, which is a lie.
You cannot.
Like Audre Lorde said in her quote, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so we are fed this like bullshit that you can use the tools of capitalism, electoral politics, the things that neoliberalism talks about to make it better. But anything that is perceived to be made better is not going to be a threat to them. And as soon as it is a threat, like Terence said, it will be crushed. So, and
also, you know, how effective can you be if you choose to involve yourself in an action that you feel is contributing to any kind of revolution, and you're putting yourself under certain risks? You have to ask yourself how effective you can be after that. If you have a criminal record, if you're sitting in jail, if you this is something you mentioned with wanting to do something to help the situation in Rojava, Pete. You know, if you decide to donate to an organization that could be flagged as a terrorist organization, goodbye ever having a visa to travel.
Yeah,
you know, I think that's a valid point. You run the risk of really seriously changing your entire life. You know, look at Jake Conroy. He can't travel to a lot of places now because he's been in jail for the Shack campaign.
Yeah.
You know, that's the reality of the situation you have to look at, and how effective you can be after that, and after the system has essentially crushed you in whatever way it can.
Yeah. Even, like you said, even the donation thing, you know, if you donate money to Rojava, essentially you're donating money to the PKK, which is considered a terrorist organization. And now you if someone finds out, you won't get a visa. And it's really difficult because I don't want to discourage people from donating if they want to.
But you have to be aware of the risks you're involved when you are doing things to help a situation.
And personally, I think some risks are with it. I doubt that Jake regrets his actions with the Shack campaign.
No,
you know
sure.
what I mean? So his jail time, while he may not have been useful or something during the jail time, it was maybe worth it for the action achieved. And like, personally, I do think that it's worth fighting and dying for freedom in Rojava.
Sure.
I don't want to discourage that because I feel like the fight against fascism is worth your life. You know what I mean? But not everybody is going to feel the same way, and we also can't expect them to.
But it's also so overwhelming for me because while I agree with your point, and I agree that a lot of risks are worth it, for certain individuals, those same risks might not weigh as equally for each person.
Yeah, totally agree, yeah.
And in addition to that, while we may acknowledge that certain things are actually worth even dying for, the frustrating, sad, infuriating thing is even if we as individuals say, you know what, it's actually worth dying to go and help in Rojava. That's admirable. That's great. Maybe it's a worthwhile cause. And you know what? Even if you end up dying, you were fighting for what was right. What's so frustrating is the people with the power to wipe out those people and any volunteers that go there, they don't give a shit about your life. They don't give a shit about wiping out people who were willing to literally give up their lives for that cause. And that is what is infuriating, is that there are so many powerful, destructive, violent people in the world that will take advantage of that passion and that obligation to justice and will just crush that even, which it's so difficult to even balance in my mind.
I mean, so sometimes I get into this way of thinking that it sounds kind of a little nihilistic in a way. To think about, is it what would be better, you know, for me to get old and die of old age, having not achieved anything or done small things that I don't feel like were fulfilling, or to, like, you know, sacrifice my life for freedom and let that be an inspiration to people who are like, well, is it really important enough for people to risk their lives? You know, how likely is it that sitting and talking about strategies and trying to fight against capitalism, that you one day going to have this bright spark of an idea and have no risk involved? I think like risk when fighting something as all pervasive and oppressive as like the entire capitalist system or fascism, there will never be no risk. So I personally can get into the spiral where it's like very depressing to think about. And I personally feel like I would rather die fighting for freedom than die of old age and things haven't changed.
Just so you can be comfortable, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I just think it's so difficult because you can get kind of bombarded with a lot of this information and feel the sense of obligation and duty to do something for the sake of justice. But then in my mind, I'm like, how do you weigh up? Yeah, there's always going to be risk involved in anything meaningful for the most part. And while it might be worthwhile to say, you know what, hey, let's just go help out. And if we die, it's worth it. But then you have to ask yourself, I mean, this short of sounding insensitive to say, is it worth it? But honestly, is it worth it? Like, what is the chance that you going there would actually make an impact and would actually help anyone? Or would you just be another casualty versus how many other small battles could you win had you stayed to do something else and focused on something else. And it's so difficult because there's so many huge problems. There's so many things worth fighting for. How do you even begin to choose which one to fight for? Which risks are worth it and which are not? How do you balance personal accountability and the kind of right to also have a personal life that is worth living?
Yeah.
And enriching of those around you and making other small positive impacts. To me, it's really overwhelming.
It is overwhelming and kind of individual and depending on your circumstance. So in Rojava, they need doctors, they need linguists, they need people who have experience in warfare to go and help. I would be quite useless, I think. And for me, maybe it would be like a suicide attempt to go and just join, like without any training or anything. Whereas someone else who is one of those things and have skilled expertise, maybe it is very valuable for them to go and they could use that help.
I think that's a really good point that you make. And this was something, it was a point a friend of ours actually made the other day when we were talking about activism within animal rights and being effective. And he said, he just does what he's good at because that's what everyone should do. Play to your strengths. Find the thing that you're good at and try and put that into something that can make a difference. There's no point going to fight a cause because you're passionate about it when you can't actually help because you don't have the skills. Rather, look at what skills you have, what knowledge you have, and use that in the best way you can to make the biggest difference in whatever cause you think that you can help as an individual. I think you made a really good point that you need to look at individual circumstances.
And it also depends on how you personally are able to live with yourself. Because like you said, you are entitled to enjoy your life and have a life worth living. But like for me personally, unless I'm fighting injustice how I can, my life is not going to feel worth living.
Yeah, I don't really understand how some people can prioritize their own happiness over everything else to the point where, maybe it's excessive anger from my side, but I really struggle to handle when you try and speak about an issue, whether it's like what's happening in Rojava or what is happening within animal agriculture. When you try and speak about that to raise awareness and to get people to care, and they say, I don't want to know about that, it's upsetting. And I'm like, Are you kidding me? You're worried about being upset versus lives being lost. To me, I have very little patience for that. I think there's a place for self-care and there's a place for self-preservation, but there's also a place to put your own shit aside and realize that other individuals have really massive, oppressive, violent things that they're dealing with, and your comfort really comes second to that.
Yeah, as someone who personally struggles a lot with anxiety, and I really don't like conflict, the things that I believe in are much more important than when I feel anxious, I would rather be shaky and sweaty arguing with someone about the situation in Rojava than just not mention it. So
for sure. So that was a very long-winded answer to some of those points. But thank you again, Annalise, for sending them. I think they're very worthwhile points to discuss. And hopefully our views were useful in some way to anyone listening.
So we thought that we should talk about Extinction and Animal Rebellion because at the moment both organizations are getting massive global spotlight on them. So we will link in the show notes to a bunch of articles that you can read. Check them out if you're interested in reading them. I don't know if we are going to cover everything. Basically, there's stuff happening all the time with Extinction and Animal Rebellion, but this is basically, from what we have been exposed to at least, our understanding and our critique of the rebellion movements.
Yeah, so basically Extinction Rebellion started in 2018 and they focus on non-violent direct action to raise awareness about climate change and the climate emergency. And then Animal Rebellion started as kind of, not an offshoot. I originally thought it was an offshoot or started by the same people, but they basically call on the government to end the destructive animal farming and fishing industries. And in their words, they want to follow in Extinction Rebellion's footsteps. So it seems like it's not the same people that have started it, but they kind of have modeled it off of Extinction Rebellion and are doing the same thing. They also have the same demands, but their focus is on anti-speciesism specifically. So they've shifted the focus to animal agriculture and fishing and animal rights, essentially. But their demands are the same.
So those demands are: 1, government must tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency, working with other institutions to communicate the urgency for change. 2, government must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025. 3, government must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. To just give a critique straight away, to me it's kind of weird that a movement that positions itself as a direct action radical movement, all 3 of their demands are asking government to do things.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't feel like very grassroots style demands. You know what I mean? It's like putting the onus on government to create change, and instead of people grassroots led change.
Yeah. So we're going to delve a little bit more into the critiques and problems, but I also thought it was important to just also say that there is some positive, at least at an initial look, at Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion, and there is a lot of support for them, in addition to a lot of criticism from other people. But I think it's important to mention a couple of the things that are good or could have been good from these movements.
One pro is that I saw that Animal Rebellion have been putting ads up in the unused ad spaces on trains, explicitly anti-speciesist and vegan messaging.
Or in train stations, right?
Yeah, train stations, but also on the inside of the subways.
Oh, okay.
Which is pretty cool. So I think that's one positive.
Yeah, I also thought this is a very small thing, but something that I think is quite cool that's explicitly stated on the Animal Rebellion site is that they also have room there where you can request a British Sign Language translation for any protests that they organize. So I think that's cool that they're being quite inclusive in that sense, at least not being ableist and saying we'll have translators there.
Another pro is that it is actually really impressive how many people they have mobilized. There are a lot of people that are involved in it, and they've really managed to organize themselves very well.
So I think that the focus on direct action could have been good and is a good stance to take, but I think the major source of their problems starts with their demands and their focus on government. But there's also a lot of problems as you kind of unpack what they do and how they do things.
Yeah, so I think to me it's kind of confusing, like you said, that it's not an offshoot Animal Rebellion, but it should have been, I feel like, included in it. I don't think that it's great to have a distinction between Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion. It's kind of a combined fight in my mind, and to me it can be kind of confusing to not have it. And it's actually one of the critiques I have had about Extinction Rebellion since the beginning is that they have not embraced veganism and been explicitly promoting veganism as a way to fight climate change.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's actually a problem if it is as it seems. Other people who have started this kind of quote to follow in the footsteps of Extinction Rebellion, why did they not just approach Extinction Rebellion and say, hey peeps, you have completely neglected veganism in what you're doing, and you've completely removed animal rights from the conversation and the destructive nature of animal agriculture. How about we include that and work with them to do that? I also think the distinction, besides being arbitrary, is problematic because there's already such resistance to any kind of animal rights messaging. Animal Rebellion is not going to be any more palatable to the general public than Extinction Rebellion. So it would have made more sense to just add that extra clause to what Extinction Rebellion is doing rather than start Animal Rebellion, which to the public probably looks like any other animal rights movement and will probably get the same kind of response, I guess.
But the fact that they include rebellion on it, like the word rebellion and Extinction Rebellion, it does make it seem like it's the same thing, but like two factions. But for all we know, Animal Rebellion has approached Extinction Rebellion and they rejected it.
Yeah, that's also true.
So not 100% sure.
But they have the same kind of branding and stuff, so I'm sure there would be good communication. But I don't understand why they didn't just umbrella that extra clause under Extinction Rebellion. It seems silly. The next problem that's pretty overt with Extinction Rebellion is that it's very much a reformist movement. So they want adjustments to the present system, which to me is a problem. Because they're portraying capitalism essentially as being something that's capable of evolving into a green system, quote unquote green, which is nonsensical. because any kind of so-called green legislation is not likely to ever be meaningful. Any government or policy change that is implemented to apparently care about the environment is going to be counter to capitalism, because capitalism requires infinite growth and exploitation of resources. So that doesn't make sense to me at all. And you can't separate politics from the key features of capitalism. You can't just assume that capitalism can suddenly evolve into some positive thing that cares about the environment, because it's counter to what capitalism stands for.
And anything that they achieve will be allowed by the capitalist system because it's not a threat. And
Exactly.
anything that would be a threat towards capitalism, obviously, is not going to be tolerated. So I totally agree. It's like super weird to want to adjust the system, but then to call yourself like a radical grassroots movement.
Again, it's the whole master's tools.
Yeah.
We'll never, Also, the government is never going to be neutral in mediating conflicts between private interests and corporate interests versus the common good. The common good always comes second. Even if there are, for example, massive taxes on violations in climate policy, corporations are either going to, like you said, reject it or pay the taxes. And what's that going to mean? It's going to mean that someone is going to be exploited so that they can still make their profit margins.
Yeah, always. Then they can make themselves look like philanthropists, which is just capitalism patting itself on the back.
Exactly.
The other issue is that both movements seem to be making like these tokenizing efforts to make themselves seem more diverse. Both are very much white middle class dominated movements. And it was really problematic recently that I saw someone screenshot a message sent to the Vegans of Color UK Instagram account. It was from the official Animal Rebellion Instagram account saying, "Hey guys, hope you're good. Just wondered if you had heard of Animal Rebellion. We're protesting in London at the moment and your support would be incredible. 3 exclamation marks. Would you come and do a talk for us possibly? Question mark, X." So the Vegans of Color UK responded, "Absolutely not. We are not the tokens you are looking for." To which Animal Rebellion, and I'm not sure if they wrote it and like sent it so it looks like it's afterwards, but it says, "Oh, why not?" And how it comes across is like, why do you not want to be our tokens?
Okay, I
Like,
personally think
that's how I read it anyway.
Yeah, but I personally think that they were probably saying why not to the first message, saying absolutely not.
Yeah,
But even that is like, think for a second.
yeah. So the person who posted it on Instagram, their handle is Eshe Kia Mazuri, said, "If you don't know, go educate yourself on why Extinction Rebellion / Animal Rebellion are dangerous to the vegan and activist movements. And them trying to put a black face to their shit is performative and tokenizing. We ain't the ones. Leave that to those others who seek that kind of white middle class validation." This is like a big problem. There was an article written on Medium by Bay Sharam, who's a London-based drag artist and queer Muslim activist. And the article they wrote is really good. We'll link to it in the show notes. But Extinction Rebellion have also been tokenizing in the sense that they've, for example, asked community feeding organizations who primarily provide free food to disadvantaged people of color to come and feed the Extinction Rebellion activists for free.
So ridiculous.
And like, these are people who can afford food. Do you know what I mean? And they're protesting, and well done. But to expect organizations with little to no funding who feed disadvantaged people to come and feed privileged white people. And a quote in that article that I thought was really good from Galdem, taken from what they wrote, "This is what Extinction Rebellion must do to engage with people of color on climate justice," is, during the last week of the protests, it's been alleged that several Extinction Rebellion activists reported fellow rebels to the police, resulting in immigration checks. People who come into contact with the police are at risk of deportation, tearing families apart and removing people to countries that they've never known. Without an overarching strategy which encompasses privilege, this approach makes it difficult for people of color to feel safe and supported in white-led movements.
So basically, people from Extinction Rebellion reported other people to the police to do immigration checks. That blows my mind.
Well, maybe we should speak about the problem with police, because like everything kind of ties in and overlaps. It's quite hard to put this in this like neat list.
Yeah.
But the fact that they are so friendly with police is a problem.
Yeah.
Not only is it a problem that other Extinction Rebellion activists have reported people to immigration, but the fact as well that the leaders tell the cops where they're going to be.
And
So
kind of encourage people to get arrested.
that is this major issue
Yeah.
with this.
And they've said things like, if you are a person of privilege, to use that privilege when you get arrested to speak more about the cause. But that, again, is marginalizing people who are at serious risk
Yeah.
if they are going to get arrested.
Yeah, big
You know-
time. I mean, to quote further from that article, they said that encouragement and glamorization of getting arrested is something that's a problem within the movement. And white middle class people don't face the same problems with being arrested that, for example, brown, disabled Muslim immigrant would face. So to quote it, it says, black and brown bodies will face disproportionately more abuse when remanded in custody or when confronted with police in a protest setting. Our lives will be impacted even more because we participated in this movement.
And I'm sorry, but it's just not good enough to say, oh, well, if you have privilege, then you should be okay with getting arrested and speaking out about it. Because again, like, what message are you sending then?
Yeah.
To say, hey, people of color, come protest with us. Don't worry, we'll get arrested for you. But we're going to encourage this. And then we're also going to be super friendly to police who continuously victimize and oppress you.
Yeah, exactly.
Even as far as people sending flowers to a police station where people of color have died in custody.
Yeah.
How ridiculous.
With the thank you note. There was even a photo of two protesters at a protest saying, "Thank you, London police."
Ridiculous. And I get that they're trying to have this like public appearance of being non-violent and yes, disruptive, but no, we're not being violent, we're not disrupting, we're not disrespecting the police. Why? Why are you doing that? I understand that you're trying to gain support from the public, but at the cost of what?
Yeah.
Being friends with the people who are oppressing so many of the people you want to stand next to you in the fight.
To me, it's kind of mind-blowing that people who are non-violent want to work with police. You
It's
do not
ridiculous.
get more violence than police.
Yeah.
Like
Their
police,
job is to be violent.
Yes, we are not friends with police. They are our enemy. No grassroots radical movement on earth can work with police. Otherwise, it's not a grassroots radical movement.
Otherwise, again, you're using the system to dismantle the system.
Yeah.
Not going to work.
So it is a problem that they encourage people to get arrested and kind of martyr themselves. It also, they don't think at all about the mental health concerns of people going into prison. It's a traumatizing experience.
Again, the risk of like we spoke about earlier, if you're going to engage in certain acts, you have to look at the risks. How many of the people getting arrested have actually properly looked into those risks? How many of them have thought of the implications of having criminal records and all of that stuff?
Exactly.
Also having their details captured in the system.
Exactly. And that is really irresponsible of the leadership of the Extinction Rebellion movement. I think that is such a bad tactic to encourage protesters to get arrested.
Yeah.
To quote a link from that article, written by a grassroots collective called Wretched of the Earth. They are really worth looking into, led by people of color. They say, in order to envision a future in which we will all be liberated from the root causes of the climate crisis, capitalism, extractivism, racism, sexism, classism, ableism, and other systems of oppression, the climate movement must reflect the complex realities of everyone's lives in their narrative. And further on, they say, and this complexity needs to be reflected in the strategies too. Many of us live with the risk of arrest and criminalization. We have to carefully weigh the costs that can be inflicted on us and our communities by a state that is driven to target those who are racialized ahead of those who are white. The strategy of Extinction Rebellion, with the primary tactic of being arrested, is a valid one, but it needs to be underlined by an ongoing analysis of privilege, as well as the reality of police and state violence. Extinction Rebellion participants should be able to use their privilege to risk arrest, while at the same time highlighting the racialized nature of policing. Though some of this analysis has started to happen, until it becomes central to Extinction Rebellion's organizing, it is not sufficient. To address climate change and its roots in inequity and domination, a diversity and plurality of tactics and communities will be needed to co-create the transformative change necessary.
Exactly.
I think that's a really powerful
written.
quote.
Yeah.
I don't think we could say it better.
No, that's brilliant. Just another point that I think is worthy of criticism is the focus, and I've seen a couple of quotes where this is emphasized, but the focus on extinction in the sense that we need to tackle climate change because it is putting humanity at risk of extinction, and that human survival is the focus. We want our species to survive. I think that is such a problem.
Yeah.
We are the cause of so many problems. We are the cause of the sixth mass extinction of other living beings.
Yeah.
The focus should not be a human supremacist one.
Exactly. And that was kind of disappointing for me, because the first time I heard of Extinction Rebellion, I was like, oh, cool. Like, they're using that symbol and it's about the sixth mass extinction. But like you said, there's a lot of stuff going around that really makes it seem like it's about human extinction.
Well, that's the thing. It's like we're doing this for the survival of humanity. I'm sorry, but if that's your goal, I don't support it, because quite frankly, in the current state of affairs, it's better off, like the whole planet is better off if we do go extinct.
Yeah.
For the sake of the other species who are currently going extinct because of us.
Yeah, I totally agree. So that's kind of confusing. But T, what do you think of Greta Thunberg?
That's a complicated question. I think it's really cool that she is this young, passionate activist who is trying to do something. I think there's a lot of complex issues that her presence within Extinction Rebellion and her presence within the discourse around climate change brings to the surface, which I think is important to mention. Firstly, from the perspective of the people who think that she is amazing and doing amazing things. Firstly, there are a lot of other young people who have been speaking about these issues for a long time, mostly indigenous people who have been ignored.
For like 500 years.
Yeah. And obviously social media and everything has changed the way that we communicate and the way we have access to information. But we have to acknowledge the fact that she is a privileged white girl who is easy for the media to support and to put on TV screens and give publicity to, because she's not actually a real threat to the system.
Or to white supremacy.
Yeah. And it's nice to see. Look at this passionate young girl doing something cool for the climate. You know, yay, let's pat her on the back. Let's all feel good about the future of our youth.
Yeah.
And I think that's very simplistic.
Yeah, I mean, she's a lot more palatable than, say, like a Native American girl who paints her face or something. She kind of, by her existence on the media, is a threat to white supremacy, whereas Greta isn't. She's like this, you know, sweet Swedish girl.
But I also think that there's, considering her age and considering how much exposure she's getting, personally, I think that there's a lot of unfair pressure on her.
Yeah,
you know, there was the little interview clip, you saw it as well. We watched it together with Trevor Noah. I thought it was cool that he interviewed her and they had a nice chat about climate change. But what struck me, and I know that the intention behind it was good, was he said, "What do you think the government should do?" And I'm like, how old is she?
I think she's 16.
Yeah, and that's not to invalidate her opinions because she's young, not at all.
Yeah,
her opinions are worthy of being heard, just like any person. But to put that kind of pressure on her and to say to this one individual young girl, how do we solve these problems? What is your opinion? She's not an expert. She's a passionate activist. I don't think it's fair to be asking her those questions. Yes, give her a platform to speak if she has an opinion on the matter and to say, I think this should be done, I think this should be done. But I feel like so many people are looking to her as some kind of savior to guide the movement. And that's just not fair. Look to her for inspiration, sure, because she's actually doing something, but she doesn't have the answers. Nobody does. So I think there's a lot of unfair pressure on her, but I think there's also a lot of unfair criticism of her.
I agree. And while we are acknowledging that she has privilege, I think she does too. You know, I don't think she's doing anything wrong necessarily. Just because you have privilege doesn't mean you should feel guilty about having privilege, but it depends what you do with that privilege.
Yeah.
I saw a post recently where she did go visit an indigenous community and was speaking to them and whatever. And it's important that that's not seen as this like white savior kind of thing and isn't tokenizing. But I don't think that she's a arrogant, pretentious person. And I agree with you, like, while it's important to like not demonize her or criticize her too much, it is also important to be aware of why we are giving her so much attention. And it's because she's like white and easily palatable.
But I think also that there's an important point there in what she's saying is that we shouldn't demonize her, because also she's just trying to do what she's passionate about. And she's not creating that platform for herself. The media is choosing to give her that platform.
Exactly.
And again, the capitalist system is allowing her to have that voice because she's not a threat. She hasn't chosen to do that. She hasn't chosen to have this massive following. She's just doing what she wants to do. And I don't think that she should be criticized for that.
It will be interesting to see what happens, because it might have worked in her favor for up until now to become so kind of famous. Because if she does become a threat, the whole world is paying attention to her.
Sure.
And as a threat, maybe she could hold more weight or something. But again, that's like a lot of pressure to put on this like young girl who was just kind of thrust into fame.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite funny. I think it's worth mentioning that there's a Harper's Bazaar article written by Jennifer Wright titled "These anti-Greta Thunberg criticisms are almost hilarious," and the subtext is, apparently the 16-year-old climate activist is mentally ill, not cheerful enough, and being manipulated by her parents. So I thought maybe I should just read just the titles. So the first one is, "This is child abuse. Greta Thunberg is being cruelly manipulated by her parents."
So ridiculous.
I mean, yeah, never mind her parents possibly being supportive of her being interested.
Yes, exactly.
Then someone compared, and apparently it comes up quite a lot. There was also this protest where there was this older Native American man at this rally who was being made fun of by this young fool in a Make America Great Again cap. And then this person posted a tweet comparing this guy to Greta Thunberg and saying, both are kids, but you're only, quote, allowed to criticize one of them. And it's like, what? I mean, the one person was being like a white supremacist.
And the other is fighting for climate justice.
Not doing that. Like, how do you even compare it?
Ridiculous.
Then there's always that argument that she's mentally ill. You know,
which is so ableist. She has Asperger's.
Yeah.
Irrelevant. She's doing something good.
Yeah.
Why are you even speaking about that?
And she's open about it.
Yeah.
She was quoted saying, "I have Asperger's, and that means I'm sometimes a bit different from the norm. And given the right circumstances, being different is a superpower."
I think it's actually disgusting that people would use that as a criticism of her.
Yeah, but it comes up a lot.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think these things are kind of common things, and that's why they're listed. You know, there's also this argument, how would you feel if this person supported an entirely different cause? So people equating like girls like that looked like her used in Nazi propaganda to her. I'm like, what kind of argument is that?
It's because I think when people are faced with issues of justice and people fighting for justice in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable about their own behavior, they attack the individual. And that's exactly what they're doing here. Yeah. They're saying, oh, if she was fighting for something completely reprehensible, oh, then you'd have a different story. Well, fucking obviously, Susan. So irritating.
And then just to show how disgusting the logic of the old right whites men are who are so threatened by Greta. There was this guy, Justin Murphy, who did a tweet saying, "Not even being provocative, but if you think Greta Thunberg has the maturity to guide global policy making, then you cannot object to Jeffrey Epstein paying 16-year-olds for sex." What the fuck? I don't know how else to express my feeling towards that.
I cannot even say anything without... Yeah, I mean, what a disgusting human do you have to be to try and make a point that, hey, you are putting all this responsibility on a young child, so therefore the point that I'm trying to make is then we should just give her adult responsibilities. So, hey, let's just, say that we're okay with her being violated. I can't even...
So that's a really gross point. No,
people are gross.
Honestly.
People are just gross.
Then there's the argument all the time that she's a communist. Not once, actually, has she spoken about her political stance, ever. All she is saying is, let's take scientists seriously.
Yeah.
So that's a completely like...
How controversial.
Yeah, wow. Like, let's take the experts and scientists seriously. Like, wow, What a communist. Donald Trump's annoying statement of, she seems like a very happy young girl looking forward to a bright and wonderful future, which was really funny because she put that quote in her own bio, was that she doesn't seem happy enough. But I mean, come on. Are you serious?
There was also, I cannot remember the exact quote and I'm not going to look for it. It was also in Afrikaans and my translation is not great. But there were people from here that were criticizing her in the most horrific, disgusting ways.
Oh my gosh.
And basically, I'll just summarize and say that one of these scumbags actually implied that he would be directly violent to her and then called her a very derogatory name. I'm not going to repeat any of it because it would probably be triggering for a lot of people. And also, he is not worth the effort of even translating its disgusting language. But that's the kind of mentality that's being thrown towards this young girl. Implications of even being willing to inflict sexual or physical violence against her for speaking about climate justice. What is wrong with people? What is wrong with you
honestly,
to say that?
It's disgusting.
If that guy ever listened to this podcast, which he obviously won't, but if he does, you are disgusting.
Yeah.
That's all. That's the calmest way that I can say that.
Respectfully, you're a piece of shit.
Yes.
So, okay.
No, disrespectfully. Fuck that guy.
So another argument that comes up often, criticism of her, is that she's a hypocrite because she's used plastic or done something else that's environmentally impure. So, I mean, I think that Jennifer gets the point across really well, where she says, first of all, I do not think that a girl eating vegan food on a train car is really the person you need to focus on in the climate crisis. So there was a photo of her on a train eating what looks like hummus and pita, and there's bananas and stuff. And they said, look at all the plastic. So
it's like anti-vegan people who are just like, oh, but you drive a car, so, you know, we should just eat all the animals we can.
like that logic, yeah. So
Solid logic, bro.
Jennifer says, that said, yes, people who are trying to create change in society also have to live in society.
Yeah.
That means not being able to be perfectly pure.
Oh, the shock and horror.
Yeah, and then, I mean, people constantly talk about how they don't like her physical appearance or the tone of her voice. And I think that we can't say it better than Jennifer that, yeah, well, I don't like misogyny, so I guess we're even.
Again, personal attacks, because that's all they can resort to. But anyway, I think that's enough of that discussion. It's kind of a summary of our thoughts of Extinction Rebellion and the current debates. There's probably a lot that we didn't unpack because this is already a really long episode. But just to end off, Pete found a couple of really good points to share about what we can do as white people involved in the climate, in any kind of climate activism.
Yeah, so this is still from that Medium article by Bay Sharam, who said, what can you do as a white person? I would like them to think about 1, your own privilege in being able to participate and your continued privilege in not feeling responsible for the inclusion of those with marginalized intersectionalities. So they're using the term intersectionality as in an individual who faces more than one oppression.
And those oppressions intersect.
Yes.
The next point is how to stop the centering of white fragility of fellow Extinction Rebellion activists and how you can take the emotional labor away from people of color and those of other marginalized intersectionalities.
3, how to eradicate white defensiveness of white people continuing to defend the actions of other white people.
Solid points. Then also think about how to stop tone policing of those from non-white, non-middle class backgrounds. Black and brown bodies in particular are often forced to put in this labor of constructive education to police and change how we react to something. That our criticism and the way we talk about something needs to reach this white middle class standard, and that if we don't, we're doing it wrong.
And then the last point number 5, is to think about how to dismantle the trope of the good marginalized person, i.e. the black friend of yours who is an Extinction Rebellion activist who happens to be more palatable than other people of color, for example, because they happen to speak the right way, say things the right way, and code switch to be able to communicate more effectively with you.
Brilliant points.
Good points, Bay.
That sounds like you're saying, good points, Bay.
Yeah, that's true.
That's actually how Pete speaks.
Yeah. But we'll link to that article as well as the Wretched of the Earth and everything else we mentioned in the show notes. But yeah, thanks for listening to us rant about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and if you have any points or questions or comments about anything we've discussed, from Extinction Rebellion to Rojava to anything that we raised today, please email us, mail@letsragetogether.co.za. We'd love to hear from you. Even if you have suggestions for future episodes, send those through as well.
Yeah, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. The handle is Let's Rage Together Podcast. Until next time,
love and liberation.